The blood on the ivory floor of the celestial atrium was not red. It was a shimmering, iridescent violet, pulsing with the dying glow of 1,000 micro-machines. I watched it through the flickering lens of a damaged security drone, the static on my monitor tasting like burnt ozone and failed promises. On Aetheris-Nine, perfection was the only allowed aesthetic, but right now the architecture of the High Court was being redesigned by gravity and high explosives. Kaelen was down. That was the first thing the telemetry told me. His heart rate was a jagged mountain range of stress, spiking so hard the sensors thought he was already flatlining. Beside him, Echelon Seraphina stood like a statue carved from starlight, her ceremonial robes torn and stained with the same violet fluid. She was supposed to be the untouchable center of our collective consciousness, a biological goddess who didn't know the meaning of the word fear. But the way she looked at Kaelen, it wasn't the gaze of a ruler looking at a broken tool. It was something else, something human. Vax, Kaelen's voice rasped through my headset, wet and heavy with the sound of lungs fighting for air. Tell me you've got a back door. I'm working it, Kes, I whispered, my fingers dancing across a decrypted console in the bowels of the maintenance deck. My screen was a mess of red icons and screaming sirens. The Hollow didn't just bring guns. They brought ghost code. The station's central nervous system is eating itself. Every iris door between you and the hangars is locked down by a level 10 override. A group of masked figures in matte black tactical gear emerged from the smoke of the collapsed mezzanine. They didn't move like soldiers. They moved like shadows, their footsteps making no sound on the debris. One of them leveled a void launcher, a weapon designed to unmake whatever it touched. Kaelen pushed himself up. It looked like he was fighting the weight of a whole planet. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, the sleeve of his uniform dissolved by the needle strike that had taken the hit meant for the Echelon. Negative on the hangars, Vax? Kaelen grunted. He stepped in front of Seraphina, his broad shoulders blocking the trajectory of the assassins. Give me the service shafts, Sector 14. Kes, that's a death trap, I blurted out. Those tunnels haven't been pressurized since the last solar flare. If the seals don't hold, you're just vacuum bait. Better to freeze than to be deleted, Kaelen replied. He didn't look back at Seraphina, but his hand reached behind him, finding hers. His fingers gripped her wrist, not with the rehearsed precision of a guard, but with the desperation of an anchor. The assassin fired. A streak of negative light hissed through the air, turning the marble it touched into fine gray ash. Kaelen lunged, pulling Seraphina into a roll behind a fallen crystalline pillar. The impact jarred my camera feed, the screen turning into a blizzard of white noise. Go, I screamed at my terminal, overriding the safety locks on the maintenance hatch beneath them. The floor plates slid open with a screech of protesting metal. I saw two figures vanish into the dark, followed by a burst of fire from the mezzanine. Then the feed cut out completely. The silence in my sub-deck bunker was deafening. I sat there for 3 seconds, listening to the hum of my own cooling fans, wondering if I had just helped the most important being in the galaxy commit suicide in a trash chute. Kaelen, I called out, my voice trembling. Luminary Seraphina? Do you copy? Static. Then a soft, melodic tone that didn't belong in a war zone. We are here, Master Vax, Seraphina's voice said. It was calm, yet there was a tremor in the resonance, like a bell that had been struck too hard. Kaelen he is experiencing a malfunction. He's not malfunctioning, ma'am, I said, finally seeing a low-resolution thermal blip appear on my sub-level map. He's dying. That void needle he took is a memory eater. If we don't get him to a med bay in the next 45 minutes, there won't be enough of him left to reboot. I will not allow him to be lost, she said. The authority in her voice was absolute, but the map showed her standing still in a pitch-black tunnel, miles below the surface of the station, surrounded by monsters who wanted her head on a spike. Well then, I muttered, wiping the sweat from my eyes. Welcome to the grimy side of heaven. Let's move before the shadows find the basement. The air in Sector 14 smelled like ancient grease and the metallic tang of recycled breath. It was the kind of place where the echelons were never meant to walk. The dark, tangled intestines of Aetheris-Nine, where the machines did the dirty work of keeping the paradise above from suffocating. I watched them through a cracked lens in a ventilation grate. Kaelen was leaning heavily on Seraphina. It was a sight that would have caused a sector-wide scandal if it were broadcasted. The synapse, the ultimate protector, was being carried by the very being he was sworn to die for. Kaelen, eyes up, I snapped through the comms. You're drifting toward the heat sink. Another 10 meters and you'll be cooked medium rare. The guard's head lolled to the side. His skin was turning a translucent shade of gray, the violet veins of the virus mapping a roadmap of decay across his neck. I can't see the HUD, Vax. It's all white. Everything is turning white. The virus is hitting your optical nerves, I realized, my stomach dropping. It's deleting your visual processing. Kez, listen to me. You have to rely on the tether. Can you feel her? Kaelen didn't answer. Instead, he gripped Seraphina's shoulder tighter. She didn't flinch. She placed her hand over his, her fingers glowing with a faint, golden bioluminescence. He feels my intent, Master Vax, she said. We are moving. Tell us of the pursuers. I checked the sensor sweep of the upper corridors. The Hollowed weren't stupid. They had already bypassed the lockdown and were dropping tactical drones into the shafts. I counted 6 signatures moving with a predatory, synchronized rhythm. You've got 6 bogies on your tail, I said. They're using acoustic sensors. If you breathe too loud, they'll pin you. There's a pressure lock 300 meters ahead. If you can make it past the seal, I can dump the atmosphere in the corridor behind you. It won't kill the drones, but it'll scramble their flight path. Kaelen stumbled, his knees hitting the metal grating with a hollow clang. He let out a sharp gasp of pain that turned into a wet cough. Kaelen! Seraphina cried out. She knelt beside him, her magnificent robes trailing in the sludge of the deck. Leave me, Kaelen hissed. The words were distorted, his vocal cords being overwritten by the ghost code. Protocol Alpha 6. If the synapse is compromised, the echelon must bug out. I do not recognize that protocol, she replied. Her voice had lost its ethereal quality. It was sharp, grounded, and stubborn. It's not a request, ma'am, I yelled into the comms, my heart hammering against my ribs. Kez is right. If they catch both of you, the consensus falls. You are the only thing holding the piece together. If you go dark, the whole sector turns into a graveyard. Then let it be a graveyard, she whispered, because I will not be a goddess of a world that demands I abandon the only soul who ever stood between me and the void without being ordered to. There was a long silence. Even Kaelen stopped struggling. I stared at my monitors, the lines of code blurring. In all the history of the Aetheris, an echelon had never spoken like that. They were supposed to be logic personified. They were supposed to be the greater good. Vax, she said, her tone returning to a terrifying calm. Open the lock. Now. I didn't argue. I couldn't. I punched in the override codes, my hands shaking. The heavy circular door at the end of the hall groaned, its hydraulic pistons screaming as they forced centuries of rust to give way. The drones were closing in. 50 meters. 40. I could see their red scanning beams flickering through the smoke in the corridor. Go, 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 I urged. Seraphina pulled Kaelen's arm over her neck and hauled him upward with a strength that shouldn't have been possible for her slender frame. They limped toward the opening. The first drone rounded the corner, its pulse cannon humming as it gathered energy. It locked onto Kaelen's heat signature. I triggered the vents. A massive wall of compressed air exploded from the ceiling, a white fog of pressure that hit the drone like a physical fist. The machine spun wildly, slamming into the wall in a shower of sparks. But 5 more were right behind it, adjusting their stabilizers, their logic processors calculating the wind resistance in milliseconds. Seraphina and Kaelen crossed the threshold. Seal it, she commanded. I slammed the close command. The lock began to rotate shut, but a piece of debris, a fallen pipe from the ceiling, jammed the track. The door stopped, leaving a gap of 30 centimeters, a gap big enough for a void needle to pass through. One of the drones accelerated, its optics glowing a lethal crimson as it aimed directly through the opening. Kaelen saw it. Even through his blinded eyes, he felt the spike in the electromagnetic field. He didn't think. He threw his body into the gap, using his own back as a shield to block the jam. Kez, no, I screamed. The drone fired. The needle buried itself into Kaelen's shoulder, right next to the first wound. He didn't scream. He just let out a low guttural groan as his body spasmed. With his remaining strength, he kicked the debris out of the track. The lock slammed shut with a final metallic thud. For a moment, the only sound was the heavy, ragged breathing of two people on the other side of the door. "Kaelen?" I asked, my voice a whisper. He is fading, Vax," Seraphina said. Her voice sounded small now, broken. I can feel his memories leaving him. He doesn't know who I am anymore. I looked at my screen. Kaelen's neural map was dissolving. The sectors labeled training, tactics, and identity were turning gray. But there was one small cluster of neurons, buried deep in the limbic system, that stayed bright. A stubborn, golden spark in the middle of a dying fire. "What is he holding on to?" I asked, mostly to myself. Seraphina was silent for a long time. I could see her on the infrared, sitting on the cold floor, cradling Kaelen's head in her lap. She didn't look like a ruler. She looked like a girl lost in the dark. "He is holding on to the feeling of my hand," she said. "He has forgotten my name, my title, and the station. But he hasn't forgotten that I'm here." I leaned back in my chair, the cold sweat drying on my skin. We were 3 floors above the reactor core, surrounded by an army of ghosts, and our only hope was a guard who couldn't see and a goddess who had decided to become a person. 30 minutes, I said, looking at the timer. "We've got 30 minutes to reach the sub-bay before his heart stops. Kez, if you can hear me, don't you dare flatline on us now. We've still got a hell of a lot of trouble to get into." I'll try, Vax," a voice whispered. It wasn't Kaelen's usual sharp tone. It was thin, like a ghost of the man he used to be. "But I'll try." The journey had only just begun, and the price of loyalty was already proving to be higher than anyone had ever calculated. The crawl space was a symphony of agony and leaking coolant. I watched the thermal ghosts of Kaelen and Seraphina through a grainy, low-frequency sensor that made the world look like it was made of glowing green smoke. They were moving through the gutter now, a service artery so narrow that Kaelen's broad shoulders scraped against the rusted bulkheads with every agonizing step. My fingers were a blur on the haptic interface, playing a desperate game of hide-and-seek with the station's automated security routines. "You're doing great, Highness," I muttered, though I knew she couldn't hear my sarcasm through the localized interference. Just another 200 meters of filth and darkness. It's exactly what the travel brochures promised. "Vax," Kaelen's voice crackled, sounding like a radio being drowned in a bucket of water. I've lost tactile response in my right hand. The virus is moving into the motor cortex. I bit my lips so hard I tasted copper. "Keep it together, soldier. You're the only one with a gun, even if you can't feel your fingers." "Seraphina, can you check his pulse?" "I am not merely checking his pulse, Master Vax," the Echelon replied. Her voice was a steady thread of silk in a room full of jagged glass. "I am attempting to bridge the gaps in his neural pathways with my own bioelectric field. It is inefficient." "Bridging?" I blinked at my data stream. "You're literally acting as a jumper cable for his brain?" "That's not in the administrative handbook, ma'am. You could fry your own circuits." "The handbook was written for a station that wasn't currently being dismantled by its own shadow," she said. I navigated them past a cluster of sparking high-voltage lines that hung from the ceiling like weeping willow branches made of lightning. The station felt alive around us, but not in a good way. It felt like a giant beast that had caught a terminal fever. Somewhere above us, the High Court was likely in a state of absolute meltdown. The consensus, the collective consciousness of the galaxy, depended on the echelons to act as the central processing units for peace. Without Seraphina, the gears of 1,000 worlds would start grinding against each other until everything turned to dust. The Hollowed had planned this perfectly. They didn't just want her dead, they wanted her gone, erased from the data stream so the galaxy would wake up with a hole in its head. "Hey, Princess," I said, trying to keep my voice from cracking. "Why'd you do it?" "Why did I do what, Master Vax?" "Stay. You had 3 seconds before the evacuation pod sealed. You could have been halfway to the nearest cruiser by now." Kaelen was down. "The protocol is clear. A synapse is a consumable resource. You're the asset. Why stay in the dark with a dying man?" I watched the green blips on my screen. Seraphina stopped moving. In the silence of the maintenance deck, I could hear the distant rhythmic thumping of the station's secondary heart, the massive fans that kept the air moving. He did not calculate the odds when he stepped in front of that needle, she said softly. He did not check his contract to see if his life was worth the exchange. He simply acted. For 32 years, I have been the recipient of calculated loyalty. I have been loved by billions because I am a symbol. Kaelen. Kaelen stayed because of a choice he made long ago. I decided it was time I made a choice of my own. That's a real nice sentiment, ma'am, I said, leaning back into my greasy pilot's chair. But sentiments don't stop void needles, and they definitely don't stop the 6 clanks currently descending through the ventilation shaft behind you. Clanks? Seraphina asked. Slang for tactical drones, Highness. Mean, fast, and currently very interested in your location. Get to the end of that corridor. There's a gravity lift that'll drop you into the water recycling plant. It's cold, it's loud, and the sonar's a mess down there. It's our best shot at ghosting them. Kaelen groaned, a sound of pure, unadulterated pain. We're moving. I watched them scramble. Kaelen was almost dead weight now. Seraphina had draped his good arm over her shoulders, her regal posture bent under the weight of a man she was supposed to consider a pawn. They reached the gravity lift just as the first drone burst through the ceiling of the gutter. The drone was a masterpiece of lethal engineering, a segmented, chrome-plated centipede with a laser eye that pulsed with a cold, blue light. It didn't hesitate. It unleashed a flurry of micro-darts that hissed through the air like angry wasps. Jump! I yelled. They tumbled into the gravity lift just as the darts slammed into the metal door, the impact sounding like a hail of stones on a tin roof. I slammed the command for the lift to descend. The floor fell away beneath them, dropping them 30 stories into the bowels of Aetheris-Nine. The transition from the maintenance deck to the water recycling plant was like being dunked into an ice-cold ocean of white noise. Massive pipes, some 5 meters in diameter, hummed with the vibration of millions of liters of gray water being processed every hour. Steam rose from the floor grates in thick, choking plumes, making my thermal sensors almost useless. Kaelen? Seraphina? You still with me? A long pause, then a ragged breath. Still here, Vax, Kaelen whispered. But the world it's gone. I'm blind. I'm completely dark. I cursed under my breath, my fingers flying over the keyboard. I was trying to find a way to patch into his visual cortex, but the virus had encrypted the entire pathway. It was like trying to talk to someone through a wall made of lead. Seraphina, you're his eyes now, I said. There's a walkway directly ahead of you. It's narrow and slick with condensation. If you fall, you're going into the filtration vats, and I promise you, that is not a way anyone wants to go out. I have him, Vax, she said. I looked at the secondary monitor. The drones hadn't followed them down the lift. They were smarter than that. They were splitting up, taking the service ladders to flank the exits. We were being boxed in. You've got 10 minutes before they secure the perimeter, I warned. There's a sub-bay at the end of this level. It has a high-yield medical unit, the kind they use for industrial accidents. It's got enough juice to purge a void needle, but it's going to be like trying to put out a forest fire with a cup of water. Master Vax, Seraphina said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Kaelen is shivering. His skin, it feels like ice. The virus is shutting down his thermal regulation, I said, the weight of the situation finally starting to crush the air out of my chest. He's going into shock. Seraphina, you have to talk to him. Keep him conscious. If he slips into a coma now, we'll never get him back. Seraphina sat down on the vibrating walkway, pulling Kaelen's head into her lap once more. I watched the thermal bloom of their bodies, 2 small sparks of warmth in a cavern of cold, unfeeling machinery. Kaelen, she murmured. Kaelen, listen to my voice. Do you remember the gardens on Velonis Prime? The blue lilies that only bloomed when the second moon was full? I remember the color, he rasped, but I can't see the flowers. Focus on the sound, she said. Focus on the way the wind felt through the valley. You told me once that you wanted to retire there. You wanted to build a house where the gravity was low enough that you could jump off the porch and stay in the air for 5 seconds. Kaelen let out a weak, sputtering laugh. 5 seconds. That's a long time. It is an eternity when you are happy, she said. I watched the clock. 7 minutes until the drones reached them. I was trying to hijack a nearby service crane, hoping I could use it as a distraction. But the ghost code was already there, fighting me for every line of command. It was like wrestling with a shadow. Every time I thought I had a grip, it slipped through my fingers. Vax, Kaelen said suddenly, his voice clearer than it had been in an hour. Yeah, buddy, if this goes south, if I don't make it to the bay, you get her out. You hear me? You use the emergency vent in Sector 19. It'll blow you right into the debris field, but her suit can handle it. Shut up, Kez, I snapped, though my eyes were stinging. Nobody's blowing anyone into a debris field. We're going to the bay, we're fixing your leaky wetware, and then we're going to find whoever sent those clanks and make them regret they were ever born. I appreciate the optimism, Vax, he said, his voice fading again. But my memory, it's like a book with half the pages ripped out. I'm starting to forget why we're even running. Because she's staying, I whispered to my screen. Because she's staying when she doesn't have to. I saw the drones on the far end of the walkway. Their red eyes cut through the steam like lasers. They had found the trail. Time's up, I said, my voice cold and hard. Seraphina, get him up. We have to move. Now. The water recycling plant was no longer just a loud, humid cavern. It had become a hunting ground. I could hear the high-pitched whine of the drone's rotors over the roar of the massive turbines. On my screen, the red icons were moving with a terrifying, predatory grace, leapfrogging over the massive pipes to cut off every possible exit. Seraphina was struggling. Kaelen was almost completely unresponsive now, his legs dragging uselessly behind him. She was breathing hard, the exertion of carrying a 100-kilogram soldier through a high-gravity environment taking its toll on her refined physiology. Master Vax, the door to the sub-bay is locked, she panted. I'm on it, I snarled, my fingers cramping as I hammered at the console. The ghost code had fortified the lock with a rolling encryption. It was like trying to solve a puzzle while someone was hitting me in the head with a hammer. Give me 30 seconds. We do not have 30 seconds, she cried out. A drone landed on a pipe directly above them. Its segmented body coiled like a snake as it prepared to strike. I saw its pulse cannon begin to glow. I did the only thing I could think of. I overloaded the pressure sensor on the pipe the drone was sitting on. A jet of superheated steam erupted with a sound like a thunderclap. The drone was blasted off its perch, spinning out into the darkness below, its metal chassis glowing orange from the heat. Nice shot, Vax, Kaelen murmured, his head lolling against Seraphina's shoulder. Don't get used to it, I shouted. There are 5 more. The bay door hissed open, and Seraphina dragged Kaelen inside. I slammed it shut behind them, just as a barrage of micro-darts sparked against the reinforced alloy. The sub-bay was a small, clinical space, filled with the hum of medical equipment that looked like it had been designed in another century. In the center was the med-purge unit, a glass coffin surrounded by a forest of robotic arms and chemical injectors. Get him in there, I yelled. Seraphina hoisted Kaelen into the unit. The glass lid slid shut with a hiss. Initiating scan, the automated voice of the bay announced. Warning, unidentified viral agent detected. Neural degradation at 78%. Purge protocol will be 90% lethal. 90%? Seraphina gasped, her hands pressing against the glass. Vax, you didn't say it was that high. It's the only shot he has, Highness, I replied, my voice cracking. The void needle isn't just a toxin, it's a rewrite. If we don't wipe it now, there won't be a Kaelen left to save. It'll just be a hollow shell with the Hollowed's code running his heart. Do it, Kaelen said. His voice was coming through the unit's speakers, sounding hollow and metallic. Do it before I forget. Before I forget her face, I hit the button. The med-purge unit erupted into a frenzy of activity. Dozens of needles plunged into Kaelen's veins, pumping him full of high-velocity antivirals and neural scaffolders. A blinding white light filled the glass coffin, the intensity of the purge enough to make my own monitors flare with interference. Kaelen's body buckled and convulsed. A scream, thin and distorted, echoed through the bay. Seraphina didn't look away. She stood there, her eyes wide and filled with a raw, agonizing empathy. She was touching the glass, her bioluminescence flaring in a desperate attempt to reach him through the barrier. "Stop it," she whispered. "It's killing him." "I can't stop it, ma'am," I said, tears finally blurring my vision. "If I stop it now, he's gone forever." The scream suddenly cut out. The white light faded. The med-purge unit hissed as the pressure equalized. The glass lid slid back, revealing Kaelen. He looked like a ghost. His skin was the color of old parchment, and he was covered in a layer of fine gray ash, the remains of the destroyed virus being expelled through his pores. "Kaelen?" Seraphina reached out, her hand trembling as she touched his cheek. His eyes opened. They were clear, but they were empty. He looked at her, and for a long, agonizing moment, there was no recognition, no loyalty, no love, just a deep, terrifying blankness. "Who are you?" he whispered. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Seraphina recoiled as if she had been struck. "It is me," she said, her voice trembling. "Seraphina. You saved my life." I don't know that name," he said, his voice flat. "I don't know this place." I sat in my bunker staring at the screen, my heart breaking for a woman I had spent my entire life resenting. She had sacrificed everything, her status, her safety, her connection to the consensus, for a man who no longer even knew her name. "Vax," she said, her voice turning to ice. "What happened?" "The virus," I said, my voice thick with grief. "It ate too much before the purge could finish. It didn't just take his training, it took his life, his history." "He's a blank slate, Highness." A loud boom shook the bay. The door I had just locked began to glow red as a thermal cutter started working its way through the alloy. The Hollowed were tired of playing games. "We have to go," I said. "Seraphina, listen to me. There's a shuttle in the sub-bay hangar. It's a junk heap, but it's fueled. You have to take him and leave. Now." "I cannot leave him like this," she said, looking down at Kaelen, who was staring at his own hands with a look of confused wonder. "You don't have a choice," I roared. "If you stay, they kill you both. If you leave, he at least has a chance to start over. Go." The door burst open. 3 drones flew into the room, their weapons hot. Seraphina didn't flinch. She stood over Kaelen, her robes billowing in the sudden draft of the air filtration system. "Master Vax," she said, her voice suddenly resonating with the full, terrifying power of an echelon. "Tell me how to use his weapon." "What?" I blinked. "Ma'am, you can't—" "Tell me." "The pulse blade is on his right thigh," I stammered. "It's biometrically locked to his thumbprint. You have to take his hand." Seraphina grabbed Kalen's limp hand and pressed his thumb against the hilt of the blade. A beam of humming, blue energy ignited with a sound like a cracking whip. "Kaelen," she said, looking him in the eyes, "I know you do not remember me. I know you do not know why you are here. But you must trust me. Do you hear me? You must trust the person I am, even if you do not know the person I was." Kaelen looked at the blue blade, then up at her. For a second, just a tiny fraction of a second, that golden spark I had seen earlier flickered in his eyes. It wasn't a memory. It was an instinct. "I trust you," he whispered. "Then fight," she cried. The drones opened fire. Seraphina, guided by my voice through the comms and her own strange, intuitive connection to Kaelen, moved with a grace that defied physics. She wasn't a soldier, but she was a conductor, and Kaelen was her instrument. Even without his memories, his muscles remembered the dance of death. He moved on pure reflex, the pulse blade carving through the air in a blur of blue light. The first drone was sliced in half before it could fire a second shot. The second was crushed against the wall by a piece of medical equipment Seraphina flung with a burst of her bioluminescent energy. It was a beautiful, terrifying spectacle. The goddess and the ghost, fighting together in a room full of blood and broken glass. They reached the shuttle just as the third drone exploded in a ball of fire. "Vax, we are at the shuttle," Seraphina said, her voice sounding exhausted but triumphant. "Get in," I shouted. "I'm opening the hangar doors." The shuttle's engines roared to life, a coughing, sputtering sound that made my heart leap. I watched the external cameras as the small, battered craft drifted out of the sub-bay and into the cold, silent void of space. I leaned back in my chair, the silence of the bunker returning to haunt me. I had done it. I had saved the echelon. I had saved the synapse. But as I watched the shuttle disappear into the starfield, I realized that the man who had left wasn't the man who had arrived, and the woman who had saved him wasn't the goddess the galaxy thought she was. Master Vax? Seraphina's voice came through the long-range comms, faint and filled with static. Yes, Highness. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, ma'am, I said, a small smile finally touching my lips. You're still on a junk heap with a guy who thinks his thumb is a glow stick. You've got a long way to go. We have all the time in the world, she said. I watched the empty space where they had been for a long time. The station was still screaming, the war was still coming, and I was still a man with too many debts and not enough luck. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I had done something that mattered. I had seen what loyalty looked like when it was stripped of its armor and its titles. It looked like a woman refusing to leave a man behind in the dark. And it looked like a man trusting a stranger with his life because he could still feel the warmth of her hand. The shuttle was a metal coffin vibrating at the frequency of a dying scream. Outside the reinforced viewports, the stars were not static points of light, but long, jagged smears of silver against an infinite bruise. We were traveling through the interstitial space between the station's outer rings and the nearest jump gate, a stretch of vacuum known among pilots as the dead man's reach. My monitors back in the bunker were still flickering, fed by a thin, unstable long-range relay that I was keeping alive with nothing but prayer and stolen bandwidth. Sitrep, Vax, Seraphina said. She was sitting in the pilot's chair, though she wasn't touching the controls. The shuttle was slaved to my remote terminal, a jagged piece of ghost code I'd written on the fly to keep them from drifting into a sun. Kaelen was strapped into the navigator's seat behind her, his head tilted back, his eyes fixed on the ceiling as if he were trying to read a language written in the scuffs of the metal plating. Sitrep is Fubar, Highness, I said, leaning into the mic. I've got 3 shadow stalkers, the fast ones, the ones that don't show up on civilian radar, skimming the wake of your engines. They're about 10 light minutes out and closing. If we don't hit the jump gate in the next 20 minutes, they're going to zip tie your shuttle and drag you back to the High Court in pieces. I do not understand that word, Kaelen said. His voice was sandpaper on silk. Zip tie. It sounds restrictive. It is, buddy, I said, my heart twisting. It means they're the bad guys and they want to put you in a very small box. How's the head? There is a loud buzzing, Kaelen replied, like a million insects are trying to exit through my ears. And my hands. They keep wanting to grab things that aren't there. That's your muscle memory, I explained. Your brain is a blank slate, but your body is a 5-star general. It's trying to find a rifle because it knows there's a fight coming. Just try to breathe. Seraphina reached back, her hand finding Kaelen's arm. She didn't look at him. She kept her gaze on the empty void ahead. Her bioluminescence was dim, a soft, pulsing amber that cast long shadows across the cramped cockpit. She looked exhausted, her regal composure finally fraying at the edges. Master Vax, she said, if we reach the gate, where will it take us? Nowhere good, I admitted. The main gates are all monitored by the consensus. The moment you pop out the other side, every peacekeeper in the quadrant will have a lock on you. We have to take a back door. There's an old mining colony on an asteroid called Calypsos Minor. It's been abandoned since the Great Collapse. The air is thin, the gravity is wonky, and the locals are mostly dust eaters and smugglers who don't care about echelons or high courts. It's the perfect place to disappear. Then that is where we shall go, she said. The shuttle groaned as I pushed the thrusters to 110% of their rated capacity. The internal dampeners were struggling to keep up, and I could see the vibrations rattling Kaelen's teeth. He didn't complain. He just watched Seraphina's hand on his arm, his brow furrowed in a deep, agonizing concentration. Who was I? He asked suddenly. The question hung in the air, heavier than the G-force pressing them into their seats. I stopped typing. Seraphina's hand tightened on his sleeve. You were my protector, she said softly. Was I more than that? Kaelen asked. I feel a weight when I look at you. It is not just the weight of a job. It is something heavy, something that hurts. You were a man of honor, she said. her voice wavering for the first time. "You were the only person in the station who spoke to me without a script. You used to tell me that the stars looked like spilled salt on a black velvet tablecloth. You hated the ceremonial banquets because the forks were too small for your hands." Kaelen looked at his hands, large, scarred, and powerful. "I remember the salt," he whispered, "but I do not remember the man who said it." "That's the virus, Kez," I broke in, my voice rough. "It's like someone went into your house and threw all your furniture out the window. The house is still there, but it's empty. But listen to me, man. You're still the same guy. You're still the guy who took a void needle for a woman who was supposed to be a stranger. That kind of brave doesn't come from a memory bank. It comes from the bone." The alarm on my console began to scream, a high-pitched rhythmic wail that meant we were being painted by targeting sensors. "Incoming!" I yelled. "They're locked on!" A bolt of blue energy streaked past the shuttle's hull, so close that the static discharge made the cockpit lights flicker and die. The shuttle rocked violently, sending a shower of sparks from the overhead panels. "Vax!" Seraphina cried out. "I'm on it! I'm dumping the chaff!" I hit the manual override for the emergency dispensers. A cloud of metallic shards and sensor ghosts erupted from the back of the shuttle, blooming in the vacuum like a silver flower. The next two shots from the Shadow Stalkers hit the chaff, blooming into beautiful, harmless explosions of light. But they were gaining. The Shadow Stalkers were built for the chase. Our shuttle was built for hauling garbage. The distance was dropping. 9 light minutes, 8. "Seraphina," I said, my voice urgent. "I'm going to have to pull a manual slingshot around the jump gate's gravity well to build enough speed to break the lock. It's going to get very bumpy. I need you to hold on to Kaelen. If he hits his head now, he's toast." "I have him," she said. She unbuckled her own restraints and climbed into the back, wrapping her arms around Kaelen's chest, pinning him to the seat. She buried her face in the crook of his neck, her long ears drawn back tight against her head. Kaelen's eyes went wide. For a second, he looked like he was going to push her away, his combat instincts flaring at the sudden contact. Then he stopped. He let out a long, shaky breath and leaned into her, his head resting against hers. "It's okay," he whispered. "I've got you." It was a lie, of course. He couldn't even see the wall in front of him, and he didn't know how to fire a gun anymore. But the way he said it, with a quiet, absolute certainty, made me realize that the virus had missed something. It had taken his facts, but it hadn't taken his soul. I gripped the flight stick of my remote terminal and pulled back hard. The shuttle screamed as it hit the gravity well. The stars turned into white lines of fire. The hull plates groaned, the sound like a giant beast being torn apart. I could see the temperature gauges on the engines climbing into the red, then the purple. "Hold on," I roared. We hit the jump gate at a velocity that shouldn't have been possible. There was a moment of absolute, blinding whiteness, a sensation of being pulled through a needle's eye, and then the silence of the void returned. We were out. I checked the long-range scanners. The Shadow Stalkers were gone, left behind in the gravity well. We were in the Calypso system, a graveyard of jagged rocks and forgotten dreams. "Vax?" Seraphina's voice came through, sounding small and exhausted. "Are we safe?" "For now, Highness," I said, leaning back and wiping the sweat from my face. "For now, but we've got a long walk ahead of us, and the air on Calypsos isn't exactly fresh." She didn't answer. I looked at the internal camera. She was still holding Kaelen, and he was still holding her. They were two ghosts drifting in the dark, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a cynical engineer. I felt like a witness to something that wasn't supposed to exist in our cold, calculated galaxy. I felt like I was looking at hope. Calypsos Minor looked like a rotted tooth floating in a sea of ink. The asteroid was a jagged, pockmarked hunk of iron and silicate, crisscrossed with the scars of 1,000 mining lasers. As the shuttle drifted toward the landing bay of the abandoned colony, the silence was oppressive. There were no welcoming beacons, no automated docking signals, just the cold, indifferent gaze of the void. The landing was less of a maneuver and more of a controlled crash. I managed to guide the shuttle into a darkened hangar, the landing skids screaming as they tore through layers of accumulated dust. The shuttle came to a halt with a final shuddering thud that sent a cloud of grit swirling past the viewports. "We are down," I said, my voice echoing in my own quiet bunker. "Seraphina, Kaelen, check your seals. The atmosphere in this sector is barely breathable. It's mostly CO2 and regret." "I can smell the rust," Kaelen murmured, "even through the filters. It smells like a cage." "That's just the colony, buddy," I said. "It hasn't seen a cleaning crew in 50 years. I watched them through the shuttle's external cameras as they stepped out onto the hangar floor. The gravity on Calypso's miner was barely a third of standard, making their movements slow and ghostly. Seraphina was wearing a pressurized envirosuit she'd scavenged from the shuttle's locker, the bulky fabric looking absurd on her elegant frame. Kaelen followed her, his pulse blade hilt clipped to his belt, though he walked with the hesitant, searching steps of a man who still didn't trust his own feet. The hangar was a graveyard of heavy machinery. Giant boring drills and ore crusher sat like sleeping monsters in the shadows. The air was thick with a fine metallic dust that caught the light of their shoulder-mounted lamps, turning the air into a shimmering fog. "Vax, where are we going?" Seraphina asked, her voice sounding metallic through the comlink. "There's a reinforced bunker in the lower levels," I said, scrolling through the ancient schematics of the colony. "It was built for the overseers during the riots. It's got its own life support in a dedicated power cell. If we can get there, we can go dark. No signals, no heat signatures. We can wait for the heat to die down." "And then?" she asked. "And then we figure out how to get you to the outer rim," I said. "There are worlds there that don't care about the consensus. You could live as a civilian. Both of you." "A civilian?" Kaelen repeated the word as if it were a foreign concept. "What does a civilian do?" "They live, Kes," I said. "They eat breakfast, they watch the sunset, and they don't get shot at. It's a pretty good gig if you can get it." They began to make their way toward the elevator shaft. The colony was a maze of rusted corridors and darkened offices. Every few meters, they passed a discarded tool or a faded poster, promising a bright future for the miners of Calypsos. It was a monument to failure, a place where the Empire had extracted what it wanted and left the rest to rot. Suddenly, Kaelen stopped. His long ears, which had been drooping, snapped forward. "Someone is here," he whispered. "Vax, I'm not seeing any life signs on the local grid," I said, my fingers flying over the keys to sharpen the sensor sweep. "He is right, Master Vax," Seraphina said, her hand going to the hilt of Kalen's blade. "I can feel a pulse. It is not human." A shadow detached itself from the ceiling. It was a scavenger drone, a spindly, four-legged machine with a circular saw where its head should have been. It had been left behind by the miners to keep the pipes clear, but decades of isolation and lack of maintenance had turned its logic core into something feral. It hissed, a sound of grinding metal, and lunged. "Kaelen!" I screamed. Kaelen didn't move. He didn't have to. Before the drone could reach them, Seraphina stepped forward. She didn't draw the blade. She didn't shout. She simply raised her hand, and a wave of golden energy erupted from her palm, a concentrated burst of echelon bioluminescence. The drone hit the energy field and was thrown backward, its legs flailing as it slammed into a heavy ore cart. It sputtered once, its saw blades spinning down into a pathetic whine, and then went dark. Seraphina stood there for a moment, her hands still raised, her chest heaving. The golden light faded slowly, leaving the corridor darker than before. "I thought you were a diplomat, Highness," I said, my voice full of awe. "I am an echelon," she replied, her voice cold and hard. "And I am the administrator of life. That includes the right to end it when it threatens what I protect." She turned to Kaelen, her expression softening instantly. "Are you hurt?" "No," he said, staring at the wrecked drone. I felt it coming, before it moved, like a shadow in the back of my mind." "That's your training," I said. "The virus can take your memories, but it can't take your instincts. You're still a predator, Kez. You just don't have a map anymore." They reached the bunker door 10 minutes later. It was a massive slab of leaded steel, covered in a thick layer of grime. I bypassed the ancient mechanical lock, and the door slid open with a groan that sounded like a tomb being unsealed. Inside, the bunker was surprisingly clean. There were 4 bunks, a small kitchenette, and a medical station that looked like it hadn't been used in a century. The air was stale, but it was pressurized. Seraphina helped Kaelen to a bunk. He sat down, his shoulders slumping, his head hanging low. The adrenaline of the escape was wearing off, leaving behind the cold, hollow reality of his condition. Seraphina began to remove her envirosuit. Beneath it, her ceremonial robes were shredded, her skin pale and smudged with soot. She looked human in the most painful way possible, exhausted, vulnerable, and alone. "Master Vax," she said, sitting down on the edge of the bunk next to Kaelen. "Yes, ma'am? You said we could live as civilians, that we could disappear." "That's the plan," I said. "Is it possible?" she asked. "Can a goddess and a ghost truly find peace in a galaxy that is built on their labor?" "I don't know, Highness," I admitted. "I've spent my whole life fixing machines because machines are honest. If you push a button, something happens. People are harder. But I've seen you today. I've seen what you did for a man who can't even remember your name. If that isn't a reason to try, I don't know what is." She looked at Kaelen. He was staring at his hands again, his brow furrowed. "Kaelen," she said softly. He looked up. "I want you to know something," she said. "I did not stay for the man you were. I stayed for the man who chose to be my shield. And even if you never remember the blue lilies or the salt, you are still that man to me." Kaelen reached out, his fingers hovering just inches from her face. He seemed to be measuring the air, trying to find the courage to bridge the gap. Finally, his hand touched her cheek. His skin was rough, hers was silk. "I don't remember the lilies," he whispered, "but I remember the way your hand felt in the dark. That is enough for now." I turned off my camera feed. I didn't need to see the rest. I sat in my bunker listening to the hum of the station's fans, and I realized that I had been wrong about everything. I thought the consensus was the only thing holding us together. I thought that without the echelons and the synapses and the protocols, we would all just fall apart. But out there, on a rotted tooth of an asteroid, two people were proving that the strongest bond in the universe wasn't a data stream or a neural link. It was a choice. It was the choice to stay. I started typing again, my fingers moving with a new purpose. I had to scrub their trail. I had to bury their flight path so deep that not even the hollowed could find them. I had to give them their 30 minutes of peace, because in a galaxy this cold, a single spark of loyalty was worth more than 1,000 suns. And I wasn't going to let anyone put it out. The air in the bunker had the flat, recycled taste of something that had been through 1,000 lungs and 10,000 filters. I sat in my dark hole back on Aetheris-Nine, watching the data streams from Calypsos Minor drift across my eyes like slow-motion snow. The station around me was a tomb, but out there on that rock, there were still two hearts beating that hadn't been synchronized by the High Court's clock. "I'm seeing a ghost," I whispered into the comms, my voice sounding thin even to my own ears. Seraphina was sitting on the floor of the bunker, her legs tucked under her, watching Kaelen as he dismantled a discarded mining laser he had found in a crate. He was moving with a terrifying mechanical fluidness, his scarred fingers dancing over the internal crystals as if they were old friends. "Master Vax?" Seraphina's voice was soft, but it carried that weight again. The sound of an echelon who was beginning to realize that the universe didn't end at the borders of her palace. "The shadow stalkers didn't just lose you at the gate," I said, my fingers tapping a nervous rhythm against the edge of my desk. "They didn't have to. I just found a background ping in the station's outbound telemetry. There is a back-channel signal, a temporal echo, hidden inside Kaelen's neural link. It wasn't the virus that was supposed to kill you, Highness. It was the lighthouse." Kaelen stopped moving. The mining laser, half assembled and glowing a faint, angry red, sat in his lap. He looked at the bulkhead, his eyes narrowing. "I am the signal?" he asked. His voice was becoming more certain, less like a ghost, and more like a man who had realized he was holding a live wire. "It's the ghost code," I explained. "When they hit you with that void needle, they didn't just wipe your memories. They planted a recursive algorithm in the blank space. It's like a beacon that only fires when your heart rate hits a certain threshold. Every time you get stressed, every time you fight, you're screaming your location to every hollowed ship in the quadrant." "Then I am a danger to her," Kaelen said. He didn't sound sad. He sounded clinical. The soldier was coming back, but he was a soldier without a commander, a weapon that had realized it was aimed at the wrong person. He stood up, the mining laser clicking as he locked the focusing lens into place. Vax, how far away are they? 4 light minutes, I said, the numbers scrolling across my vision in cold white letters. They've dropped 2 tactical drop ships into the upper atmosphere. They're not coming for a chat, buddy. They're coming for the echelon, and they're coming to reclaim their hardware. That means you. Kaelen turned to Seraphina. She had stood up, her bioluminescence flaring a bright, defiant gold. The bulky enviro suit she wore couldn't hide the fact that she was the most powerful entity for 10 sectors. Yet in that moment, she looked at the amnesiac guard with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. You cannot leave, she said. Your Majesty, Kaelen started. No, she snapped. The authority returned to her voice, but it was sharpened by something personal, something jagged. I did not crawl through the filth of this station and burn my connection to the consensus just so you could walk out that door and draw their fire. You are not a consumable resource anymore. I have declared it. Kaelen stepped toward her. He was a head taller, a wall of muscle and scarred tissue, but he moved with a strange new hesitation. He reached out and touched the collar of her suit, his fingers grazing the fabric. I don't know who the man in your stories was, he said quietly. I don't know the guy who liked lilies or small forks, but I know that if I stay in this room, those ships will level this entire asteroid to get to you. That isn't protocol, Seraphina. That's just logic. Then we change the logic, she said. I watched the data. The drop ships were entering the landing phase. They would be at the bunker in 6 minutes. My mind was racing, trying to find a glitch, a hole, a backdoor I could exploit. But the Hollowed were using high-court encryption. It was like trying to hack the stars themselves. Vax, Seraphina said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Is there a way to disconnect the beacon without killing him? I don't know, ma'am, I stammered. Ma'am? The beacon is tied to his autonomic nervous system. To stop the signal, you'd have to stop his heart. Or what? Kaelen asked. Or you'd have to flood his neural link with so much data that the beacon gets drowned out. You'd need a massive, high-bandwidth connection. Something like an echelon, Seraphina finished. No, I shouted, my voice cracking. Highness, if you do that, you're not just jumping his brain. You're plugging yourself into the ghost code. It'll tear through your consciousness like a wildfire. You'll be exposed to every bit of filth the Hollowed planted in him. You could lose your connection to the Aetheris forever. You'd just be a meat suit, a regular person. Seraphina looked at Kaelen. He was watching her, his blank eyes reflecting the golden glow of her skin. The silence in the bunker was absolute, save for the distant rhythmic thud of the dropship's thrusters hitting the rock outside. I have spent eternity being a goddess, she said, her voice filled with a strange, calm joy. I think I would like to see what it is like to be a person. Highness, don't, Kaelen started, reaching for her hand, but she was already moving. She stepped into his space, her arms wrapping around his neck, her forehead pressing against his. The bioluminescence of her skin began to pulse, not in the steady rhythm of a ruler, but in a frantic, beautiful, chaotic dance. Vax, she whispered. When I tell you, open the floodgates. I sat there, my hands hovering over the keyboard. My heart was thumping so hard I thought it would burst. This was it, the point of no return. The goddess was choosing the man over the empire, the individual over the collective. It was the most beautiful, foolish thing I had ever seen. 1 minute to contact, I said, my voice shaking. Do it, Seraphina commanded. I hit the key. The world inside the bunker didn't just explode. It shattered into a billion shards of pure, white light. On my monitors, the data streams turned into a vertical waterfall of screaming code. I saw the ghost code, the jagged black architecture of the Hollowed's malice, colliding with the golden radiance of Seraphina's consciousness. It was a war being fought in the space between two souls, a battle for the right to exist. I watched the telemetry, my eyes burning. Seraphina's vitals were spiking into the danger zone. Her neural activity was a hurricane, a storm of memories and administrator functions being shredded by the virus. And Kaelen was the eye of the storm. He was screaming, a sound of pure agony that made the speakers in my bunker rattle. But he wasn't pulling away. He was holding her, his arms locked around her as if he could keep her from being blown away by the force of her own power. "The signal!" I yelled. "The beacon is dying. It's being drowned out." But the cost was devastating. I could see Seraphina's connection to the Aetheris-Nine network flickering, one note at a time. The consensus was losing her. The goddess was falling. Suddenly, the door to the bunker exploded inward. Two hollowed executors stepped through the smoke. They were wearing heavy powered armor that made them look like obsidian statues. Their visors were blank, their weapons leveled at the two figures locked in an embrace in the center of the room. "Target acquired," one of the executors said, his voice a mechanical rasp. "Secure the echelon. Terminate the synapse." Kaelen's eyes snapped open. They weren't empty anymore. They were filled with a cold blue fire that I had never seen before. It wasn't the fire of a guard. It was the fire of a man who had just seen the end of the world and decided he wasn't finished yet. He didn't let go of Seraphina with his left arm. With his right, he reached for the mining laser on the floor. The executor fired a pulse round. Kaelen rolled, pulling Seraphina with him. The round slammed into the med station, turning the ancient equipment into a pile of slag. In one fluid motion, Kaelen brought the mining laser up and fired. The beam wasn't a clean surgical strike. It was a jagged, overclocked spear of red energy that tore through the air with a sound like a screaming banshee. It hit the first executor in the chest, the mining laser's crude power ignoring the refined shielding of the powered armor. The executor was thrown backward, his chest plate glowing white-hot before it shattered. The second executor didn't hesitate. He lunged, a vibroblade sliding from his gauntlet. Kaelen met him halfway. He didn't have his memories, he didn't have his protocols, but he had the weight of Seraphina's life in his hands. He moved like a shadow, slipping under the executor's strike, the mining laser humming as he jammed the barrel into the joint of the armor's knee. He pulled the trigger. The leg of the powered armor vaporized. The executor fell, his weight hitting the floor with a bone-jarring thud. Kaelen was on him in a second, his scars standing out like white lines against his flushed skin. He grabbed the executor's helmet and slammed it against the floor, once, twice, 3 times, until the visor cracked and the man inside went still. It was over in less than 30 seconds. Kaelen stood there, the mining laser smoking in his hand, his breath coming in short, jagged gasps. He looked down at the fallen executors, then at the smoking ruins of the bunker. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a dream and found himself in the middle of a nightmare. "Seraphina?" he gasped, dropping the laser and falling to his knees beside her. She was lying on the floor, her bioluminescence gone. Her skin was a pale, flat white, and her eyes were closed. She looked so small without the light, so fragile. I checked the monitors. Her neural link was flat. The connection to the Aetheris was gone. She was dark. "Ma'am?" I whispered into the comms. "Highness?" She stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, and for the first time, they weren't the vast, dark pools of an echelon. They were just eyes, green, speckled with brown, and filled with a deep, weary confusion. "Kaelen," she whispered. "I'm here," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm here." I can't hear them," she said, her hand reaching for her head. "The voices, the millions of voices, they're all gone. It's so quiet." She started to cry, not the dignified, silent weeping of a ruler, but the messy, sobbing grief of a person who had just lost everything she had ever known. Kaelen pulled her into his lap, his large hands cradling her head. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He just held her, his chin resting on the top of her head, his eyes fixed on the door, waiting for the next wave of shadows. "Vax," he said, his voice cold and hard. "I'm here, buddy. Are there more?" "4 more dropships," I said, my heart sinking as I looked at the long-range radar. "They're landing at the main hangar. We've got maybe 10 minutes before they secure the perimeter." "Then we leave," he said. He stood up, lifting Seraphina into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. He didn't look back at the bunker. He didn't look back at the lives they had left behind. He just walked out into the cold, dusty corridor of the mining colony, a ghost carrying a fallen goddess. "You're a civilian now, Seraphina," he whispered as they moved. "You're just a person." "And you?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. I'm just the guy who's going to make sure you get to see those blue lilies, he said. I watched them on the grainy security cameras. Two small figures moving through the darkness of a dead world. The station was falling apart, the galaxy was on the brink of war, and I was probably going to be executed for treason by the end of the week. But as I watched Kaelen kick open the door to the service tunnels, I felt a strange, inexplicable surge of triumph. The Hallowed had wanted to turn them into tools. The court had wanted to keep them as symbols, but they had chosen to be human. And in a universe made of cold steel and colder code, that was the greatest victory of all. I'm opening the vent to the sub-bay, I said, my fingers flying over the keyboard. Run, you beautiful idiots. Run like the stars are on fire. And they did. They ran into the dark, into the uncertainty, into a future where nothing was promised and everything was a choice. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the silence. I was listening for the sound of their footsteps. The only sound that mattered in the whole damn galaxy. The evacuation of the bunker was less of a strategic withdrawal and more of a desperate scramble through the necrotic intestines of Calypsos Minor. I sat in my cockpit on Aetheris-Nine, my eyes bloodshot and my hands cramping as I manipulated the station's ancient, rusted architecture like a marionette. On my screens, the two thermal ghosts, Kaelen and Seraphina, were moving through the darkness of the lower venting shafts. Behind them, a swarm of red icons pulsed with lethal intent. Vax, we've got a problem, Kaelen's voice rasped. It was stronger now, stripped of the mechanical drone of the Synapse protocol, but it was frayed by the sheer physical cost of carrying a person while his own nervous system was being rebuilt from scratch. The secondary seals are jammed. We're boxed in. I scanned the schematics, my mind racing through 300 levels of decayed infrastructure. Okay, don't panic. There's a manual override for the pressure gates, but it's in the service alcove 20 meters behind you. Kaelen, you're going to have to leave her for a second. No, Seraphina whispered. Her voice was thin, a ghost of the melodic resonance she once possessed, but there was a new jagged edge to it. He does not leave me, not again. Highness, it's 20 meters, I groaned, slamming a fist against my desk as a hollow dropship began carving through the hangar roof above them. If you don't open those gates, you're both going to be turned into pressurized paste. Kaelen, move! I watched the thermal blips. Kaelen didn't move. Instead, he adjusted his grip on her, his silhouette merging with hers on the screen. He was looking up at the ceiling, his long ears twitching in the dark. Even without his sight, even without his memory, he was listening to the shape of the danger. I'm not leaving her, Vax, he said. The certainty in his voice made my skin prickle. It wasn't the certainty of a program guard. It was the stubbornness of a man who had finally found the one thing in the universe that mattered more than his own skin. Find another way. Ha, you beautiful, stubborn idiot, I muttered. I started bypass coding a nearby maintenance drone, a rusted piece of junk that had been offline for 20 years. I forced its processor to wake up, screaming commands at its ancient logic core until it sparked to life. I piloted the little clank toward the override lever, my fingers dancing across the haptic sensors. On the screen, the drone grabbed the lever and pulled. The heavy steel gates groaned, the sound echoing through the comms like a dying giant, and slid open just as the first hollowed executors breached the corridor behind them. Run! I yelled. They burst through the gate and into the hangar. The shuttle sat there, a battered, unlovely hunk of metal that looked like it had been held together by spit and bad intentions. But it was fueled. It was ready. Kaelen threw Seraphina into the airlock and scrambled in behind her. I didn't wait for him to strap in. I slammed the remote ignition. The shuttle's engines coughed, sputtered a cloud of toxic blue exhaust, and then roared with a fury that shook the entire hangar bay. The hollowed executors opened fire. Pulse rounds sparked off the shuttle's hull, the sound like a hammer hitting a bell. I pulled the shuttle's nose up, the landing skids screaming as they tore through the hangar's support beams and punched the thrusters to 300%. We cleared the hangar just as the roof collapsed. Behind us, Calypsos Minor was disappearing into a cloud of dust and debris, the hollow dropships looking like angry fireflies in the distance. We're in the clear, I exhaled, leaning back into my chair until the plastic groaned. I felt like I had just run a marathon through a vacuum. Kaelen, Seraphina, report. The silence that followed was long, too long. I leaned toward the monitor, my heart hammering. We are here, Master Vax, Seraphina said finally. I looked at the internal camera. They were sitting on the floor of the shuttle, surrounded by crates of medical supplies and rusted tools. The golden light of her skin was completely gone, replaced by the flickering orange glow of the shuttle's emergency lights. She was holding Kaelen's head in her lap, her fingers tracing the scars on his forehead. Kaelen was breathing in slow, deep heaves. He looked older. The gray ash of the virus was gone, but it had left behind a hollowness in his cheeks and a stillness in his eyes that made him look less like a soldier and more like a survivor. The connection, she whispered, her voice trembling. It is truly gone. I can feel the silence. It is like being underwater. I can only hear the heartbeats of the people in this room. That's called being a person, ma'am, I said softly. It's loud, it's messy, and usually it's pretty lonely. But you're not alone. You've got the clumsiest, most expensive bodyguard in the galaxy. Kaelen let out a weak, sputtering laugh. He's not wrong, Seraphina. I still don't know how to use a ceremonial fork. She smiled then. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was real. It wasn't a smile for the cameras or the court. It was a smile for him. I watched them for a while, feeling like an intruder in a moment that was too private for a cynical engineer in a bunker. I had spent my whole life looking for a bridge, for a connection that wasn't dictated by code or credits. I had looked for it in the Aetheris, in the consensus, in the endless streams of data that promised unity but delivered only distance. And I had found it in a junk heap shuttle, between a woman who had given up her godhood and a man who had forgotten his name but remembered how to stay. Vax, Kaelen said, his voice stronger now. Where are we going? I looked at the star chart. We were heading toward the outer rim, toward the blue lilies and the low-gravity porches. We're going home, Kez, I said, or as close to it as we're ever going to get. Honum. The descent into Velonis Prime was nothing like the high-speed chases and the firefights of the past 2 weeks. The atmosphere of the planet was thick and sweet, a cocktail of oxygen and floral pheromones that made the shuttle's sensors hum with a confused, happy vibration. The blue lilies were everywhere, covering the valleys in a shimmering carpet of azure that looked like a fallen sky. We landed on a plateau overlooking a valley where the gravity was exactly as Kaelen had described it, soft, forgiving, and light enough to make every step feel like a promise. I watched them through the external camera as they stepped out of the shuttle. Seraphina was wearing a simple gray tunic we'd found in the shuttle stores. Her long ears were relaxed, angling toward the sound of the wind through the lilies. Kaelen walked beside her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. He wasn't guarding her anymore. He was just walking with her. They reached the edge of the plateau and stood there for a long time, looking out at the sunset. The sun of Velonis was a deep, warm amber, casting long, golden shadows across the blue flowers. Vax? Kaelen's voice came through the comms. Are you seeing this? I'm seeing it, buddy, I said. I was sitting in my dark bunker on Aetheris-Nine, surrounded by the hum of cooling fans and the smell of stale coffee. But as I looked at my screen, I felt the warmth of that sun on my own face. The station was quiet now. The high court had been restructured, the hollowed had been driven back into the shadows, and the echelons were trying to figure out how to function without their brightest star. There was a warrant out for my arrest, of course, treason, grand larceny, and the unauthorized use of a garbage shuttle. I didn't care. They could have my bunker. They could have my credits. I had seen the blue lilies. I watched Kaelen reach down and pluck a single flower from the ground. He turned to Seraphina and tucked it behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her skin. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing as she inhaled the scent of the world she had chosen. I leaned back and let out a long, slow breath. My work was done. I had scrubbed their telemetry, buried their ident codes, and burned the bridge behind them so thoroughly that even the ghost code couldn't find a way back. They were ghosts now, free, beautiful, terrifyingly human ghosts. I stood up from my chair and looked at the dark room around me. I had spent 35 years of my life believing that loyalty was something you were born with, or something you were paid for. I thought that to be a synapse was to be a machine, and to be an echelon was to be a law. But I was wrong. Loyalty isn't a program. It isn't a protocol. It's a choice you make every morning when you wake up and realize that the world is cold, and the only thing keeping the dark away is the person standing next to you. It's the decision to stay when every logic core in your head is telling you to run. It's the willingness to bleed for a stranger because you realize that, in the end, no one is a stranger if you're willing to look them in the eye. I reached out and touched the cold metal frame of my monitor. I think about that night on the Oryx Spire often. I think about the blood on the floor and the scream of the drones. I think about a queen who knelt in the dirt and a soldier who forgot his life but remembered his heart. We spend so much of our time trying to be important. We build stations that touch the stars and codes that can rewrite reality. We surround ourselves with titles and armor and protocols, hoping that they'll make us feel safe. We think that power is the ability to command, and that success is the ability to survive. But as I look at the empty screen where the shuttle used to be, I realize that the only power that matters is the power to be vulnerable. The only success is the ability to be known. Kaelen and Seraphina aren't icons anymore. They aren't the saviors of the galaxy or the defenders of the peace. They're just two people in a blue valley trying to figure out how to live without a script. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most heroic thing any of us can ever do. I'm leaving the station tonight. I've got a small scout ship hidden in the maintenance bay and enough fuel to get me as far as the reach. I don't know where I'm going, and I don't have a partner to guide me through the dark. But for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of the silence. I've learned how to choose. I wonder, as I prepare to step out of this bunker for the last time, what is the one thing you are holding on to because you think you have to? Is it a title, a grudge, or a role that someone else wrote for you? And if you let it go, if you drop the armor and the protocols and the expectations, who would be standing there to catch you? Would you have the courage to stay by someone's side, even when the world is screaming at you to run? I hope you find your blue lilies. I hope you find the person who makes the gravity feel negotiable. And most of all, I hope you realize that you were never meant to be a machine. I turned off the lights and walked toward the door. The station hummed around me, a giant, unfeeling beast of steel and glass. But as the door hissed shut behind me, I wasn't looking at the walls. I was looking at the stars, and for the first time, they didn't look like salt. They looked like home.